You know that feeling, right? You're in a customer discovery call. You're trying so hard to figure out what the prospect really needs, what their budget is, who even makes the final call. And you ask all these questions, these open-ended ones they tell you to ask, but all you get back is vague, polite brush off. Or that classic, interesting, I'll think about it. It's super frustrating. You feel like you're just guessing. But what if there was another way, a completely different approach? And get this, it actually comes from the world of Secret Servicey. Seriously. Their communication techniques, the ones they use for intelligence gathering, could actually totally change how you do customer discovery.
That's absolutely right. And today we're diving into exactly that, drawing on insights from Ari Masudi. He's a business consultant with a great masterclass on this. He focuses specifically on prospect interviews and customer discovery, and the core technique, the real game change, is called elicitation.
Elicitation. Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then. We're going to unpack what elicitation really is. Ari Masudi calls it the art of uncovering customer insight. And we want to show you, if you're a founder in marketing, sales, whatever, how this can become, well, almost like a superpower. Getting info your competitors aren't even close to finding. So let's start with maybe questioning a classic B2B sales mantra. You know the one. Ask open-ended questions and then just shut up. Sounds logical, doesn't it?
It does sound logical on the surface, but here's the thing. The uncomfortable truth, maybe, that whole approach, it's getting pretty outdated. Think about it. Prospects today, they're hyper-informed. They've heard every standard question under the sun. They've sat through countless sales calls. So they're actually conditioned to sort of deflect, give minimal answers, direct questions. They trigger what's called cognitive load.
Cognitive load, meaning?
It makes them stop, think, analyze what you're asking, why you're asking, and then filter their response.
Yeah.
It puts their guard up immediately.
Okay, so if direct questions put the guard up, what's elicitation?
Right. Elicitation is much more subtle. It's a communication technique, really, designed to gather that crucial strategic info without the other person fully realizing they're revealing it. The beauty of it is that it makes the whole thing feel less like an interview, definitely not an interrogation, and more like just a good conversation, a natural flow.
How does it manage that? Sounds a bit like magic.
Well, it taps into some pretty universal human tendencies. Things like our need to look competent, to seem knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Also, our desire, most people's desire anyway, to be helpful. And maybe the strongest one, our compulsion to correct mistakes or misinformation. Elicitation kind of leans into these psychological triggers.
Okay, I see. So you're leveraging natural human behavior instead of fighting against it.
Exactly.
And the payoff for our listeners, what's the big benefit?
It's huge, really. Twofold. First, the prospect walks away feeling good. They feel like they were heard, like it was a valuable chat, not an interrogation.
Right, because it felt like a real conversation.
Precisely. And second, you walk away with a gold mine of actionable insights. Real concrete stuff you can use. It's genuinely a win-win.
Okay, so this brings us to the core idea of elicitation, and you said it's counterintuitive.
It really is. The fundamental rule is stop asking so many questions. Start making statements instead.
Really? Fewer questions, especially for the sensitive stuff.
Especially for the sensitive stuff. Think back to that cognitive load. Questions trigger the filter. Statements, on the other hand, they just feel like part of a normal back and forth. They blend in.
Okay, give me an example, like budget. That's always the tricky one.
Perfect example. So instead of the direct hit, what's your budget for this solution? Which almost always gets you a vague non-answer like, oh, we're still figuring that out, or it depends. Try making a statement. Something like, I've noticed companies in your industry, about your size, typically invest around, say, $50,000 for solutions like this.
Okay. You're giving them a number to react to.
Exactly. And what often happens is quite powerful. They might come back with, oh, actually, we're probably looking closer to $80,000. But honestly, we'd need to see a significant ROI within the first quarter.
Wow. Okay. So they correct your number, but they also give you context, the real number and their condition.
Precisely. Because you offered a specific reference point, their natural urge is to clarify, to correct you.
Yeah.
They feel like they're helping you understand, not like they're being interrogated about their budget.
That shift is subtle, but seems incredibly powerful.
It is. And Ari Masudi, the consultant we mentioned, he talks about this. He worked with a med tech company, right? They were really struggling with budget conversation. Kept hitting that price is a concern wall, but couldn't get specifics.
Yeah, familiar story.
So they started using these elicitation techniques, making statements about typical investment. And guess what?
They got the real numbers.
They found out prospects actually had budgets 3 times higher than they'd been estimating based on those vague answers.
2 times, wow.
Yeah, that insight let them totally rethink their pricing tiers. And the result, a 40% increase in their average deal size, just from changing how they ask, or rather didn't ask, about budget.
Okay, that's a massive impact. So shifting from questions to statements is the key. How do we actually do that? Can we break down some specific techniques?
Absolutely. Let's start with one Ari highlights called the correction technique. This one directly uses that human urge we talked about, the need to fix mistakes mistakes.
The correction bias. Okay, how does that work in practice?
It's surprisingly simple, but you do need to put your ego aside for a minute. You need to be okay with seeming slightly, well, maybe slightly dumb or missing.
Huh. Okay, I can manage that for a 40% deal size.
Right, so the strategy is you deliberately state something that's slightly incorrect about their current situation, their process, something you suspect isn't quite right. Then you just pause and listen.
Okay, so I might say something like, so I'm guessing your team is still using Excel spreadsheets to manage all your inventory, right? Even if I suspect they're not.
Exactly. And they'll likely jump in with, oh no, actually, we moved over to software name last year. But honestly, we're having major headaches with the reporting features, and the integration with our CRM is, well, it's a mess.
And just like that, boom. You know their current tool, when they adopted it, and their specific pain points with it, without asking a single direct question about any of them.
Precisely. Because they're not revealing information in their mind. They're correcting you. They're helping you get your facts straight. It completely bypasses that defensive filter. People generally like to be helpful and show they know.
That's clever. Okay, what's another technique? You mentioned getting quantitative data can be tough.
Yes. Nailing down numbers. How many? How often? Those questions often get vague answers too. So for that, we use a technique called bracketing.
Bracketing, like putting bookends on it.
Kind of, yeah. Think of it as the range game. You offer a range of values instead of asking for a specific number. This encourages them to give you the actual number, again, often framed as helping you understand.
Okay, how would that sound?
So instead of how many orders do you process a day, you might say your team probably handles, somewhere between 50 and maybe 200 orders per day.
And they might say,
Oh, it's actually closer to 350 on average. And honestly, that volume is becoming our biggest bottleneck right now.
yeah,
You get the number and the associated pain point.
nice. Or for timelines.
Same idea. Instead of how long will implementation take,
Yeah.
you're probably looking at maybe a 6 to 12 month implementation timeline for something like this, I imagine.
Then they correct you.
Whoa, no.
Yeah.
More like 3 to 4 months tops. We absolutely need this up and running before Q4 kicks in. Again, you get the real timeline and the urgency behind it.
Okay, bracketing makes sense. Is there a trick to picking the range?
Good question. A little pro tip is to make the range slightly wider than what you actually suspect. If you think it's around 300, maybe say 150, 400, it feels a bit more natural, less like you're trying to pin them down precisely, and gives them more room to offer the correction comfort. It keeps the flow conversation.
Got it. Wider range feels less targeted. Okay, so we have correction, bracketing. What's the third technique? You mentioned skepticism.
Ah, yes, strategic doubt. This one is interesting. It's about using mild skepticism carefully to get more information.
Skepticism as a superpower. How does that work?
Well, expressing a little bit of doubt, like you find something hard to believe, can trigger what psychologists call defensive elaboration.
Defensive elaboration.
Okay.
Meaning they feel the need to defend their point.
Exactly. They feel compelled to provide more detail, more justification to convince you.
So what's the magic phrase?
It's often something like, I find it hard to believe that. Or maybe, wow, there's no way that for. Followed by a statement about their situation or a competitor.
Okay, give me an example. Competitors are always a good topic.
Right. You could say, maybe, I find it hard to believe that competitor X actually solves that killer problem effectively for companies your size.
And then they'll likely jump in to explain exactly why competitor X falls short, right? Giving you all their weaknesses.
Bingo. Or trying to understand internal politics, you might venture, there's just no way your board would approve a complex solution like this in the current economic climate, surely.
And that prompts them to explain the actual approval process, the criteria, maybe even who the key decision makers are and what they care about.
Exactly. It opens the door to understanding those internal dynamics. But, and this is crucial,
There's a catch.
there's a caution. You have to use strategic doubt very sparingly. And the tone is everything. It has to be light curious, maybe slightly incredulous.
Not aggressive or challenging.
Absolutely not. The goal is to encourage them to elaborate, to share more detail, because they want to correct your perceived misunderstanding or prove their point. It's not about starting an argument or making them defensive in a bad way. Gentle curiosity, not confrontation.
Okay, that makes sense. Use with care. So underlying all these techniques, correction, bracketing, strategic doubt, is this basic human psychology, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It all comes back to a few core triggers. There's the expertise trigger. People genuinely like showing they know their stuff, that they're competent. So phrases like, wow, I bet you have some interesting experiences dealing with that. Or, you must have seen this challenge evolve over time. They invite people to share their knowledge.
Makes sense. What else?
The helper instinct. Most people, fundamentally, want to be helpful. If you position yourself as someone genuinely trying to understand their world, not just sell them something, they're much more inclined to open up.
Right, framing it collaboratively.
Yeah, and related to that is the recognition need. Everyone wants to feel like their challenges are understood, that their expertise is valued. Acknowledging that makes them more receptive to sharing detail.
Okay, so we understand the psychology, we have the techniques. How do we weave this all together smoothly in a real conversation? conversation. Keep it flowing naturally.
Great question. It's about using simple conversational bridging phrases, things that feel organic.
Like what?
Well, starting with so, and then just briefly recapping something they said. So it sounds like you've been wrestling with this integration issue for about 2 years now. It shows you're listening and smoothly pivots.
Okay, so, plus a recap. What else?
Using I bet can work well. I bet there are still some tricky parts to that process even with the new software. It invites them to elaborate on challenges.
I bet. That feels natural.
And you must have is great for encouraging stories or context. Wow, you must have overcome some significant hurdles to get to this point. People often respond well to that kind of acknowledgement.
So recap, I bet. You must have. Simple things that keep it conversational while skewing towards insight.
Exactly. They feel much less like interview questions.
And you mentioned a progressive approach, going from general to specific.
Yes, that's really important for building trust. You don't just jump into asking about budget 5 minutes in.
Right. That would feel jarring.
So you structure the conversation, consciously or unconsciously, in stages, maybe 4 stages. First, you talk about the big picture, the industry context, general trends, challenges everyone in their space is facing. Build common ground.
Okay. Start broad.
Then narrow it down a bit to their specific company challenges. What are their main organizational pain points? What keeps them up at night?
Makes sense. Industry, then company.
Third, once you've built some rapport, you can start exploring their internal processes. How do decisions get made? Who needs to be involved? What does that workflow look like?
Getting more specific now.
And only then, usually, once trust is established and you have good context, you gently probe for the critical details using these elicitation techniques. Things like specific budget figures, exact timelines, non-negotiable requirements.
Industry, company, versus sub-detail. That progressive structure seems key to making elicitation work without feeling intrusive.
It absolutely is. It allows the conversation to deepen naturally.
And you hinted there might be even more advanced technique.
Well, yeah, there are definitely layers to this. Techniques like the assumption ladder, where you deliberately state assumptions as facts to test them. Or the competitor gambit, ways to leverage talk about competitor. The timeline trap to uncover urgency. But these core ones, correction, bracketing, strategic doubt, combined with the progressive approach, they give you a massive advantage already.
Okay, so let's bring this all together. For that founder, that marketer, that salesperson listening, right? What's the big take?
The big takeaway is that customer discovery doesn't have to feel like pulling teeth. It doesn't have to be an interrogation where you fire questions and hope for the best.
Right. Elicitation turns it into something more collaborative.
Exactly. It turns it into a conversation where you gather information naturally. While your competitors are stuck playing 20 questions and getting frustrated, you can use these techniques to genuinely understand your customer's world, their real needs, their hidden constraints, how they actually make decisions. Insights most people never uncover.
And these aren't just random tricks. These are refined techniques used by intelligence agencies, adapted for business by people like Ari Masudi. They're proven.
Absolutely proven. And they empower you. They let you build products that truly solve problems, craft value propositions that resonate deeply, and yeah, ultimately close deals that maybe seemed out of reach before.
It really shifts the power dynamic back to understanding, doesn't it?
It does. It's about moving from asking to understanding.
So the next time you jump on a call,
Your next customer conversation starts now. The question is, will you be asking questions, hoping for answers, or will you be having a conversation and actually getting them?